inequalities because fair distribution is not happening. Some people are benefiting from the economic model. We have tremendous amount of conflicts in the world. Last year, we spent 2.3 trillion US dollars on military expenses. And despite those expenses, we have the highest number of conflicts in the world. And that means that we don't need more military expenses, rather we need disarmament. And again, right to development in the 1986 declaration articulates the importance of disarmament. Third, we have been talking about climate change and the struggle and the challenges. And again, right to development comes into picture because if you look at the Rio Declaration, 1992, long time back, it articulates very clearly that the intergenerational equity is a key foundational aspect of right to development. Right to development has to be realized in the context of ensuring that the rights and the needs of the future generations are taken into account. I'm saying this because the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Todd will talk about this more, is now promoting this idea of human rights economy. What I'm trying to suggest here is it is merely a new label. Right to development already provides a very strong foundation to achieve what is needed. And that is needed is a very different model of development. And let me now connect it with Honduras. So it's a great pleasure to have the ambassador of Honduras, Her Excellency Marcela Maria Ines Munkanda, joining this panel. Very much appreciated. And I'm mentioning it because it just returned from a country visit to Honduras. And Honduras is one country which I visited where I found that the highest level of the government is consciously articulating an alternative model of development. That commitment is there. On ground, whether that model is getting implemented or not is a separate question. But at the highest level, the government is saying that we need a different model of governance as well as development to deal with the challenges that we are facing. So with these opening remarks, I would like to invite the ambassador to provide her intervention. And then, of course, I will introduce the moderator, and then she's going to facilitate the discussion. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this session. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, and distinguished respectful rapporteur, Professor Deva. Well, first of all, I cannot not appreciate your visit to our country, which was very well received. We are looking forward, let me tell you, to the recommendations. Now I'm gonna address to you, all participants, excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is a privilege for me to be part of this important dialogue on the interconnections between the human rights economy and the right to development. I wish to express my gratitude to Professor Deva for this initiative, as well as ACT Alliance, Human Rights Watch, the Financial Transparency Coalition, and other co-organizers for bringing us together to address these critical issues. We happily contribute to the opening of this dialogue, understanding that human rights economy not merely as a useful concept to guide our policy discussions, but more importantly, as a strategy to ensure that policy making in the areas of finance, trade, and the economic development models of a country are deeply rooted in the protection and respect of all human rights. A human rights economy offers a set of tools that can facilitate the operationalization of the right to development in important aspects, such as fair distribution, intersectional and intergenerational equity, and international cooperation. And it is time already that the ongoing efforts that are being promoted by states and multiple stakeholders are to be scaled up at a national and international level. I'm proud to say that Honduras has demonstrated a significant commitment to implementing an alternative development model that is people and planet-centered by ensuring the highest public investment in the history of our country as a result of reverting corruption schemes and retrieving transparency and sovereign control of public finances, but by promoting the law of energy, which declares energy as a human right and facilitates access to it more than 900,000 families, and the promotion of the tax justice reform to rationalize tax exemptions and expenditure and addressing tax avoidance. However, debt repayment significantly limits investment in essential services like education and health, hindering progress towards the right to development and making it more difficult to promote sustainable rights-based solutions. In 2024, approximately 2.3 billion US dollars, or nearly 20% of the national budget, was allocated to debt servicing, while education and health received only 1.6 billion US dollars and 1.2 billion dollars respectively. This reality is also faced by more than 40% of the global population that live in countries where debt servicing is higher than social investment. This imbalance reduces the resources available to combat poverty, inequality, and inadequate access to basic services. Addressing these challenges requires international reforms, such as debt for climate swaps, considering that loss and damage of the 55 most vulnerable to climate change lost approximately 525 billion US dollars to impacts such as sea level rise and storms. That is to say, we are paying for a crisis we did not produce. And another measure to be mentioned here is the increasing participation of developing countries in the financial governance structure, with a special emphasis on those countries with a higher vulnerability to climate change effects. Additionally, countries may lose up to 492 billion US dollars to tax abuse. Strengthening international frameworks that link international human rights obligations with taxation systems will enable us to ensure that human lives and public goods are protected over excessive profits. In this sense, it is important to leverage human rights to combat illicit financial flows and corruption, and implement progressive taxation policies to ensure fiscal transparency, the examination of blanket tax exemptions for corporations based on human rights impact assessments, and a more effective international tax cooperation that enables investment in sustainable rights-based development strategies. Central to this transformation is the necessity of international tax cooperation frameworks that are firmly anchored in human rights principles. The equitable mobilization and allocation of resources, along with transparency in taxation and financing, are essential to reducing inequalities and addressing systemic barriers to development. As developing countries like Honduras work to bridge the Sustainable Development Goal financing gap, we reiterate the importance of reforms in the international financial architecture to ensure its responsiveness to the challenges of today's world. To achieve true transformations, Honduras firmly encourages the practice of a human rights economy. Such an approach aligns with the principles of the right to development as expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant for ESER, CEDAW, CRPD, ILO conventions, conventions on the rights of the child, and the Declaration of the Right to Development. The link between a human rights economy and the right to development lies in their shared focus on addressing structural inequalities and ensuring equitable resource distribution. A human rights economy prioritizes social justice by embedding principles of equity, sustainability, and inclusion into economic policies, thereby supporting the transformative goals of the right to development. I reiterate my gratitude to the organizers of this event and look forward to the insights shared today, which will further inform our collective journey towards a human rights economy and the realization of the right to development, which will not be possible without the transformation of the economic development models. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very constructive and positive remarks. Very much appreciated. Now I'd like to invite Marianne Latif to moderate the discussion. She will take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Deva, and thank you indeed to the ambassador for the very profound and inspiring remarks. And welcome to all participants, our distinguished panelists, and thank you to our co-organizers, CIDSE, Francisco's International, Human Rights Watch, ACT Alliance, and Financial Transparency Coalition. It is indeed a big pleasure to be with all of you today. The idea for the panel is to have an interactive dialogue, really to underscore some of the things that the ambassador already mentioned in terms of what do we mean by the human rights economy and how do we get there, and do it in a very frank and open way, but also hopefully ending on a positive remark, because it is quite bleak as we see it. And those of us that are following COP, and this has been mentioned today already, it's quite challenging. It's quite challenging. It's quite challenging, the structures that we still need to reassess, reevaluate, and potentially reform. So as I mentioned, the idea for the panel is to be interactive. So we're going to be using a Mentimeter as a tool, and I kindly ask our OHCHR colleague to put on the screen the details for the Mentimeter. For those of you that have used it before, I invite all of you to log into menti.com, so menti.com. And you have a code on the top of the screen, which is number 43857295. So again, 43857295. So if you go to menti.com, either on your phones or your laptops, you should be able to see the first interactive question. So we'll be going through those Mentimeter questions, and we also have some video components from our co-organizers. And the idea is to really give us some food for thought to help us to interact. So I'll do my best in terms of keeping us to time. I know we're running slightly late, but we would definitely invite those of you who are in the audience to share some of your reflections, particularly case studies. So the first question we have for you to start us off connects very well with the opening remark from the ambassador, which is, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think about the human rights economy? Of course, we already had a very useful opening remarks now, but perhaps you can also reflect on what you thought before even coming to this panel. What was the first thing that came to mind? And you can see on the screen the word cloud, and hopefully we'll come back. The idea is that we circle back to another word cloud at the end to see where we got to. So I can see we are seeing justice, equality, development, fighting inequality, love, compassion, business interests, difficult. Yes. Difficult, but remember, we're supposed to end on a positive note. I'm an optimist by heart, so I do hope we can get there together. Keep on adding your suggestions. We will keep this as a record of the session. I also must say, and I should have said before we started, our colleagues from Franciscans International are kindly doing the live stream for us on YouTube, and this is mostly for our own record purposes and for member state delegations that could not be present but asked to have access to the interventions today. All right, so without further delay, and you can keep on looking at the screen while we are transitioning to our next distinguished speaker. We have the counselor from the permanent mission of Spain to UN in Geneva, Ms. Miriam Naveras Torres Quiroga, who's gonna, I'm gonna hand over to you now, so you can start with some reflections on what Spain is doing on this area of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you very much, Mr. Rapporteur. Thank you very much, dear ambassadors and chief of branch and co-organizers, and to all the participants of this event. I intervene on behalf of Ambassador Marcos Gomez, who could not be here today. I am going to explain a bit what Spain is doing at the moment. And I'll start with the paradox that sustainable development and human rights are not competing realities for us. We are, Mr. Rapporteur has said it, we are at a global time of crisis, one after the other, the fight against poverty. We said inequality first. Word that came to my mind was inequality on this question that was asked. Climate change, we've suffered it very recently in Spain, but we suffer it in all the world. continuous conflicts. The High Commissioner told us yesterday about the number of conflicts. It's not 3, it's hundreds of conflicts in the world. New technologies, I would add to the first reflection. And this cross-reflection, I think it's very useful to do it in the development dialogue and in the business and human rights forum. I think it's very, very timely that you convene the meeting at the same time. Our main objective when addressing public policies, both at national and international level, is try to contribute to avoid persisting inequalities. We are convinced of the universality of human rights, the interdependence. We cannot take it as an isolated rights. And as we are based on the indivisibility of all the rights, I am going to enter into the conference of financing for development, because we think both legs, if I may say, it's development cooperation and financing for development is very important in order to address the gaps that exist actually in financing. International cooperation is essential for the effective fulfillment of the SDGs and encourages coherent policies connecting local and global agendas and alliances. I am very glad to say that our international cooperation was started by Honduras precisely 30 years ago. And we need to address, as I was saying, the huge financing gap in the implementation of the SDGs. Only 12% apparently of the goals and targets are on track at the moment. And this gap is deepening inequalities and jeopardizes the full enjoyment of human rights and dignity. Last February, the United Nations membership chose Spain as the venue of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. It will be hosted in Sevilla from June 30th to July 3rd in 2025. And as a host, Spain aims to contribute to the approval of a final document that in any case will be, or we aim to contribute to it to be ambitious, realistic, inclusive, and participative. Placing human rights in the center of development policies is key for inclusiveness. It will be necessary to all of the participants to build a consensus over the coming months. All voices are to be heard and taken into account. We practice it with our international cooperation director plan, and we are really convinced that partnership is what can lead us to such a difficult thing as reforming financial architecture. We are all aware that development countries have greater expectations of change and improvement on reform on the international financial architecture, debt sustainability mechanisms, as it was pointed out by Her Excellency, and international fiscal cooperation. The cost of inaction would have an impact on global trust and credibility in the multilateral system, and we see that every day here in the Human Rights Council. That is why it's so important to mobilize political will and commitment at the highest level at all countries. Financing development and the SDGs means in fact mobilizing precisely those needed resources that will help us to make universal access to rights a reality. On a national level, Spain will continue to work and allocate 0.7% of GDP to development cooperation. This is a commitment that we made in the new law for development cooperation, so it's a legal commitment for us, and is a political commitment in the side of human rights, because our president of the government pledged as #1 pledge this 0.7% of GDP to development cooperation in the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights last year. Our economic policies are also in line with the human rights economy. We follow the concepts that the Office of the High Commissioner has been driven, and in fact we have been answering the different crises that we had in the recent years. First, the economic crisis, and then the pandemic. Apart from all the global crises that we mentioned at the beginning, with what we call a social shield in terms of workers' rights, health care, education, taxes, and always thinking of the most vulnerable persons in the country. We will continue doing a bet on international cooperation. And I just wanted to tell you in very practical terms concerning the Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla, the concrete proposals, I will read them very fast, the concrete proposals that we are pushing, some of them already taken by Spain in national terms, on taxation, tax on large fortunes, green taxes, fight against illicit flows, special drawing rights, rechanneling them, exploring innovative ways also to use the special drawing rights. On debt sustainability, there has been two different proposals that have been already on the table in Addis Abeba. Reform on international institutions also from a gender perspective, because we apply feminist foreign policy also in this field. And we advocate also, as a Spanish proposal, to create an operational follow-up mechanism to monitor the progress of the commitments that will be adopted in Sevilla. We see it not as an end conference, but that's the beginning of a process. Finally, on gender equality, we will use all the tools that we can to go back to justice, as it was said in the screen, in terms of gender equality. Thank you very much for this very important meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and really uplifting to hear the point on the taxation of large fortunes, which was discussed in the context of the G20 recently, and also that sustainability in reference to what Ambassador had said already about the reform of the financial architecture, which is definitely key to the human rights economies, plural. And then I should definitely say that this work is very much led by OHCHR, but it's also with some substantial work being done by civil society, of course, with all our co-sponsors here. We have a book, which is a resource for this conversation, this dialogue today, which is at the back of the room. You're more than welcome to have one of those copies. If they are gone and you would like to have one, just let me know. It's called Writing the Economy, and this relies on the work done by the Center for Economic and Social Rights, dating back to 2020. And with that, Todd, I will introduce you and also hand over to you, because I think it is really important to reflect on our initial word cloud and what is the sentiment around the human rights economy. Because for us, civil society, the human rights economies, plural, are there to guarantee material, social, and environmental conditions necessary for everyone to flourish, everyone, and including our planet, of course. And we do believe that it's plural, it's dynamic, and should encompass other initiatives such as social solidarity economies, care economies, and so forth and so on. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Todd Holland, who is the Chief of Development and Economic Social Rights branch of OHCHR. He oversees thematic areas such as the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the human rights economy, social and cultural rights, child and youth rights. Todd, I hand it over to you to reflect on, of course, the first question, please.
Well, thanks, Mariana, and I also want to thank the Special Rapporteur, ACT Alliance, Human Rights Watch, and Financial Transparency Coalition. One of the words that came up on the cloud that I thought was super interesting was paradox. And I want to pursue that a little bit further. And I think you said 3 minutes, Mariana.
Yes.
And
That is also a paradox, no?
it's also a paradox. But I can see why people would say that, because human rights and the economy, to a large degree, the economy has become a human rights free zone. And that today people kind of think, well, what does one have to do with the other? And to a large degree, I think this relates to the fact that human rights, when we were looking back at the drafting of the Universal Declaration, we saw that there were really, let's say, there was Keynesian economics, which was very much a dominant economic school, which which encouraged government intervention in the economy to produce the best results possible for everyone.
Mm.
Then you also had the growing movement of socialism, which had a similar goal. And so when human rights were originally drafted, it was normal that governments actually took interest in the impact the economy had on people. But as we see, times changed. The neoclassical school of economics became dominant with a number of assumptions that are absolutely questionable in terms of the fact that unregulated economy, the market economy will produce the best results for everyone. And I think we can see today that that's not actually the case. Thus the paradox. The idea of the human rights economy is actually just picking up on years of work that has been done in the treaty bodies, by NGOs, by academics, certainly throughout the work relative to the right to development, and saying, look, human rights needs to become relevant again to the economic sphere, economic policy making, investment and business decisions, and even our own consumer choices. Because if it isn't part of the conscientious decision-making and policy-making process, we're not going to actually respect human rights. So the human rights economy is very much about addressing the paradox, to say that yes, the majority of businesses do not consider human rights in their decision-making. They consider only, as a fiduciary duty, maximizing return to their shareholders, regardless of the impact, regardless of the costs, the human rights costs that they impose on others. This violates all of our rights. Coming out of Baku, we have a significant problem because we have a situation where those that have made the most amount of money have also concentrated power. Human rights is a useful discourse to deal with powerful entities, not always that effective, but if we all use it, human rights can be a useful way of addressing the abuses of powerful entities. That's what it has been. That's what it will be. And when we talk about the economy today, we have an out of control situation where many of those who have concentrated wealth then affect government policy to their benefit to concentrate wealth even further. Fossil fuel companies would be a good example. So I think that's in a very much a nutshell in terms of addressing, because all the other words were about the potential impact in terms of justice. That's where we want to go, and that's what we want to do, is to remind the member states that they do have a role and they do have the ability to create markets that actually produce results for everyone and respect the planet. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Todd, and a really good reminder that markets cannot be decoupled from the realization of human rights, and certainly the need to have checks and balances put in place to ensure that when we're talking about the realization of human rights, we both have an enabling state for their realization, but also we have tools in place to ensure that violations are tracked and reparations are put in place if at all possible. So one of the things that of course I would like to do is to bring us back to this forum, the UN Business and Human Rights Forum, and of course the role of corporations. Our next video and our next question, if Marina will allow me, I talked about some of that, so I will ask our OHCHR colleague to show a video from CITSE, and then I'll kindly introduce our next distinguished speaker to reflect on some of the reflections from Montura, which is also a very interesting case study. And while we are navigating the technicalities, which we all can be standing solidarity, as we've all had challenges, I also wanted to point out that One of the things that we had found when we were putting together the Writing the Economy book, which you can see in the back of the room, is that we do feel that there is quite a lot of disparate case studies, positive, very encouraging case studies done, sometimes very localized or sometimes actually at national level. There are some member states, and even the ones that are here today, do have some very interesting and positive case studies, but not necessarily connecting to one thread. And we do believe that when we're talking about human rights economies, it's about having that thread whereby you tie things together and enable this environment where human rights flourish, but also bring it back human rights back front and center. So without further ado, I'll refer to the video, and hopefully you can also see the audio.
Live on farming. How do they live if they don't have land?
I would suggest we just go back. It's a very short video from a larger campaign, which you can obviously.
These large plantations have been created by national governments in the name of development.
If 80% of Africans live on farming, how do they live if they don't have land?
Thank you. And this is a work called Land Grab by Tsitse. Of course, it's supposed to be provocative, but again, we are supposed to be thinking collaboration, positive case studies. That's definitely the intention that we put together the methodology today. I will then direct us to the next Mentimeter, which has a question related to this, which I would like all of you to reflect on, which is, how would the role of corporations evolve in the context of a human rights economy or human rights economies and the realization of the right to development? So it would be great. It's an open-ended question. It's longer than just one word. So to avoid another paradox, please do feel free to enter your questions, and then I'll introduce our next panelist. And again, it's menti.com, and the access code, if you close the window, it's 43857295. And if there is anyone online, please feel free to contribute to the Mentimeter as well, if you ever feel inclined to do so. I can see change in business models already on the screen. Limit the size of companies. Corporations would pay for taxes in all jurisdictions, corporate due diligence. The shareholder capital model would have to be dramatically reformed or abandoned, which I think this is something that Todd alluded to, and definitely something that we looked at when we did the work on the Writing the Economy book, but also related work that other like-minded allies are doing. Really, how can we fundamentally shift the neoliberal economic model to put people and planet at the center? And I can see transfer of technology, people-centered corporations instead of profits. That's an interesting reflection. And to respect and over-respect all legislations and moral and ethics too. Okay, I will let you gaze at the screen and continue on adding your responses. And I also let Marina think quickly on some of those reflections, but I would first like to introduce her. Marina de Moura Borges Leal is the head of human rights for Latin America for Natura and Company. It's a great pleasure. She's connected to the B team. I also want to acknowledge and thank the B team for putting us in touch and to ensure that we have a lens from the private sector here with us. Marina, I'll hand over to you to reflect on the questions. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Professor, for hosting this incredible session as well. I'd like to introduce actually first. It's really good to have companies actually being part of this conversation on human rights economy and how we can actually fix this. So I will introduce briefly Natura and introduce as a positive case. Not saying that we don't have challenges, because we do. I mean, you have a whole forum talking about human rights due diligence and how hard it is to do it. But I want to actually, the ask was to give a positive note as of, well, what can business do? So Natura is a Brazilian-based cosmetic company, but it has a global presence of over 50 countries. Our business model is actually selling products through our resellers, 8 million women. So it's very interesting to see the gender lenses on this discussion as well. So 8 million women around the world, as well as based on an economy in the Amazon with over 10,000 families on our supply chains in the Amazon. So having this huge network, we try to do business quite differently. And what we actually believe is that the world do not need other big companies. It needs better companies. It needs better companies for the world. So our aim is not to be the biggest cosmetic company in the world, but the best for the world. So that's our motto. That's our logo. That's what we intend to do. And we see the world through a regenerative lenses, which put people, climate, and nature as part of the system. And something that is that's important for us is that the system should build capacities, not only things. So we don't need actually only to build and sell things, but also building up capacities on our network. So this is our goal as well. And when it comes to human rights, we believe that business should, of course, respect human rights and do due diligence. And as we all know, it's hard, it's difficult to do it, but we have whole panels for this, and this is something we need to tackle. And we tackle, not saying that we don't face challenges, because we do, but we offer a different lenses as well. Aside from being due diligence, we have what we say being humankind. So we introduce the lenses of development within the business. And I will share with you a few projects that we have. First is when we talk about human rights, when we talk about development, this is not something we do apart from the business. This is an impact we do through the business. So this is not something we do after we pay our shareholders. This is within the business. So I saw some of those comments when in the mentee. So that's the first thing to address. The second is 10 years ago, we with UNDP our own HDI, Human Development Index. So for this 8 million women, we calculate HDI for the last 10 years, and we calculate in the same dimensions as the original Human Development Index, but we do with microdata. And this is a KPI that is not part of a foundation or an institute. This is a business KPI, and this is how we developed our strategy, not only our culture strategy, but also our business strategy. That's how we were able to create climate justice programs, tackle gender violence, tackle literacy, and tackle digital illiteracy as well within this 8 million women. And of course, doing this with gender lenses is also important. We do development as well for the communities in the Amazon. There we apply the SPI, Social Progress Index, regarding because it's a lot of indigenous and traditional communities. So just to state that the development lenses is within our business, and this is part of our as well bonus strategy for the executives and so on. So again, this is not philanthropy, and this is not that this is not important, but we think that business should exist to create positive impact because business are within the system. And that's something that we need to face. Business are not account for the impact they have. Financial accountability, it's only on their P&L, and P&L does not account for human rights. So I think the panel said human rights should be relevant to economics. So until human rights are not part of the P&L of companies, this will not happen. We created 7 years ago what we call integrated P&L as well, that we account our impact on natural capital, human capital, and social capital as well. So we calculate the positive and negative, which we have in the impact in society. And that's the first step. We need to talk with investors. We need to hold companies accountable as well for their impacts they have in the world. But that's not the case of how businesses are doing now. Stock markets does not look at human rights as well. So this is something we push a lot, we advocate a lot, is how are we actually accounting companies for. So to end on a positive note, we do believe this is possible. We do believe business should be done to make the planet better. That's why we are a B Corp company and all the certification you can think. but certifications are not enough. That's why we have to talk about the right to development and human rights economies and plural, which is very important as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thank you for very concrete examples. I'm just wondering, you gave one concrete example about including human rights into P&Ls, and I'm also thinking what was said before in terms of the shareholder value model. Do you have any reflections on how to systematically and substantially shift away from that model?
That's $1 million question. You put me on the spot. Actually, what we've been doing is, from my perspective only, the model we have in place does not answer to the challenges we have, because that's what happens. We pay shareholders, and then with the money that is left, we do some good. So for me, we should address this within the business. It's before paying shareholders. So we can't implode the whole system of shareholders, but we can at least start doing this within the business and not out of philanthropy. So that's what we've been trying to do, instead of imploding everything, but trying to do within the business, because and that's what we discovered on this integrated P&L. For every dollar we profit, we impact $2.7 in society. So having the company is actually good for society through this methodology, which I encourage you. We have a paper published with this. So instead of changing everything, maybe we can start changing with what we already have in place.
Thank you for being agile with such a difficult question.
Yeah.
And for being honest as well. Todd, please do come in.
No, I just wanted to thank you for the example, and then to say that sometimes solutions are hiding in plain sight.
Mm.
Because last time I checked, human rights is part of the rule of law. And I don't know how we developed an understanding that the fiduciary duties of companies can ignore the rule of law. Companies can't go around and kill people.
Mm.
But they can go around and pollute and kill people. So we have a problem here, because governments need to take seriously their obligations to regulate and to say, no, fiduciary duty needs to be in accord with the rule of law. And the rule of law includes human rights because we've adopted these treaties.
Mm.
Then her company will be in the forefront because they've already figured out how to do it. But the majority of companies do not actually consider rule of law as part of their fiduciary duty. And that includes, that's why we have climate change.
Mm.
Because we can dump huge amounts of costs onto others.
Mm.
Companies can actually rake in money based on violating our rights.
Mm.
We have to stop that.
Thank you so much, Todd, for that call. I mean, I would even frame it as a call to action. With that segue, which is a fantastic one, I would ask our colleagues from OHCHR to show our next video, which is on Latin America. It actually was recorded by a colleague from Francisco's International from Brazil, actually at COP, so directly from Baku.
Activism is at the heart of the capitalist system. It's a process of accumulation through expropriation of nature. So we live in an extractive mode of economy, and it's inherent of extractivism, the violence. Not only the impacts that causes nature, but also human rights violations. I think one of the ways that to face this problem is to start with the communities to think the possibilities to overcome this for an economy, post-extractive economy, an economy that depends less from extracting and much more relying on the relations that we have in the territories. When we go to the issue of mining, one example that is the struggle for territories free from mining, where you're going to have different approaches in ways of living. The second perspective is how we're going to face the false solutions that are coming for the issues of the climate crisis. They are imposing, it means the global north, to keep the standards of life that depends on a lot of raw materials. They're imposing to us the issue of energy. But energy they are proposing, the so-called clean energy, depends on more extraction, more impacts, and more destruction. So there's a need to rethink the model where we live and to involve society in the different sectors of what to do.
Thank you very much. And I would then steer us towards the next Mentimeter, where we welcome everyone to input. And the next Mentimeter, and again, going to your menti.com, and the code is above in the screen. The question is, how can the right to development and the human rights economy or human rights economies help states to ensure a just transition away from fossil fuels? Feel free to give examples if you have any, particularly the member states that are in the room. It's open to any input, really. So again, how can the right to development and human rights economies help states to ensure a just transition away from fossil fuels? And Todd, if it's okay, I'll go back to you to reflect on this very important challenge posted by Brother Peret, who was asking us how to move to post-extractive economies, or how to change and really fundamentally look at our relation to territories and nature, which actually was mentioned earlier in one of the development dialogues today, and how we protect the right of future generations. So I can see in the Mentimeter, alternative energy systems, awareness, intergenerational equity, there you go. Tax on wealth. Taxation is coming very strongly, which I'm sure the colleagues that are working on the UN Tax Convention will be pleased and delighted. I can say myself, I'm very encouraged by that. Transfer of technology, regulate large corporations, sharing technology, right to life comes before climate change. Use the proceeds from taxes on fossil fuel to support a just transition and alternative energies. Rights-based green industrial policy. Participatory policymaking, voices of indigenous peoples to be heard. And I would add to that, communities, riverine people, those that are needed to those territories. So feel free to keep on adding. I guess, as I said, this will become the part of our historical memory of this conversation, but I'll hand over to Todd to reflect on this challenge, please.
Mariana, I guess I'll make 3 points, even though the within the context of this is absolutely necessary and very difficult. With that said, the transition to greener energy, not necessarily energy that does not have an impact on people, should be thought of also in a decentralized way. Why do I say that? Because there's a very interesting article, I can't remember the journal, but I'll find it if anybody would like the article, that talked about that today we've concentrated too much economic power in those that control energy. And that green energy provides us an opportunity to decentralize and actually have individuals be part of their own production and own use. And this could actually help to transition to a situation where people are more empowered and that you do not have such a huge concentration of wealth, which has created problems. And to repeat the same thing, but only using solar or wind, could actually end up with a problem. Second, green bonds. We're making the transition to green energy more difficult than it needs to be, because people pay for their energy. Problem is that the market won't solve it. But then again, the market doesn't solve education. The market doesn't solve healthcare. The market doesn't solve care and support. Basically, green bonds can be issued by all governments. They can be international. They can be issued by international financial institutions because people pay for their energy. What we're missing is capital. But if we're waiting for the market will go to wherever the return is greatest. So I think that we're crying a lot of crocodile tears because the solution is in front of all governments if they wanted to do it. The third is the extractive. When I was the representative of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Colombia, we had a really interesting project. We had an area that was super conflictual between the FARC and the government, and it was an area where there was gold mining. There was a gold mining company called Mineros S.A. We actually started a project with Mineros S.A., the local community, and interacting with the FARC. Because it was important that the community that was affected had a voice, which they hadn't had before. It was important that the local authorities, who had actually used this as a tax revenue, but also to some degree used it for corruption purposes, also had to interact with the local community about how they were going to use the tax revenues from the gold mine. And so the idea of bringing communities together with government officials and with the company was extremely important for the UN. We don't do it enough because it's important to bring those communities that are affected together to speak and to see how you can actually take some advantage and minimize the harms that could be created through the extractive process. Thanks.
Thank you. Very relevant point, which was made in the video about the role of communities, but also a reflection. I mean, if we look at tax cuts given to fossil fuel companies, it overpasses the 1.3 trillion we need for climate finance, which we haven't been able to agree on, unfortunately. So there's just one reflection on the numbers that are behind. So there is definitely resources available. It's just how we allocate it, what we prioritize. But I'll have the time is short, and Mariana, I'm very interested in your reflections, and I'm welcoming anyone who wants to come in on any of the points raised. But because time is short, I will just move us on to the last interactive element, which is Asia Pacific. We have a video from Human Rights Watch and their work in Sri Lanka. And then we have a short Mentimeter. I will run us through, and then I'll circle back to the panel. And again, do be ready for your menti.com, and for the question that we're going to ask is going to focus on the role of the state in international financial institutions.
How would you pay for your expenses if they suddenly increased by 50% in the middle of an economic crisis? For Shanti, that is a reality. She, like many others in Sri Lanka, has been directly affected not only by inflation, but also by conditions attached to an International Monetary Fund bailout. The IMF loan program conditions disproportionately affect people with low incomes worldwide. For example, by asking for cuts to public spending that affect them, or taxes that increase the costs of basic goods and services. The IMF says they are balancing the impacts of these conditions by requiring governments to invest a minimum in some areas of social spending and by improving social security systems. But
thank you. And this really looks at, social protection funds that are needed for that, and also some reflections on austerity. The austerity conditionalities that are imposed sometimes in the global south. I would welcome then us, as I said, the last Mentimeter, which I'm sure you're very excited about. It's focusing on what are the roles of the state and international financial institutions in promoting a human rights economy or human rights economies, as I said earlier, and the realization of the right to development. So it's an open-ended question again. Feel free to, again, share reflections on the concept or the question itself, or feel free to share examples you might have from your work. And again, member states are very much encouraged to share any reflections they have themselves. And Marina, I'll go over to you, and you don't feel you necessarily need to reflect on this question, but just wider reflections on the points raised before. But before I hand over to you, I'll just read some things in the Mentimeter. I can see pushing businesses in a direction that serves planet and people. The states must ensure that companies are not facilitating international crimes. Participatory regulations must ensure their companies don't operate in illegal settlements in Palestine. Very, very concrete example there. Wealth and huge profits need to be taxed much more, reduce the cost of debt, to lead by example, and good governance. So with that, leading by example, and I'll hand over to you, Marina, for any reflections you might want to add to the panel and the wider discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually want to circle back on the discussion that on the previous mentee and remarks we talked. So I agree. I think we're making green transition more complex than it should be. However, we do need to be careful on the green transition and the new green economy not to reflect old habits of the regular economy. So when we talk about green bonds and we're talking about carbon market, they should not reflect and they should not have the same behavior markets do now. So having a carbon market, it should be aligned with human rights. And honestly, from a business perspective, this is not something that is actually happening. Those are two areas that are still very much apart within the business. So we have normally the human rights department, we have normally the climate department, if they have it. So they do not talk to the same, we do not build on together. So this is something very important, not only for companies, but also for academia, having the same, bringing those brains together to actually think about a new future or green economy that is actually tackling inequality, not enhancing inequality. So I think we are making more complex, but I don't think we are addressing things that need to be addressed in the green economy as well. As for example, when we talk adaptation as well, who does the adaptation? What's the responsibility for adaptation? I think climate change brings new challenges, and we are reproducing things that we already have that enhance inequality. So green economy should be together with human rights, and I don't see that as part of the table for companies at least.
Thank you very much, Marina. I will open to the audience in a little bit. I'm just looking at my panelists, and the last question we have for you is, what do you think are the benefits of a human rights economy or economies? What are the challenges, and perhaps what inspires you about human rights economy? I hope we've been able to inspire you somehow. I'm looking at the audience if anyone has any questions or any examples. Yes, I can see a hand there, and Palestine next. I think your hand was first. Yes, 1 minute, please, for a question.
Talita from Brazil. I'm a public defender in Brazil. And so we had recently the G20 Social Summit and also the G20. And later President Biden, he went to Amazonia and he gave $50 million to the fund, Amazonian Fund. And it's equivalent of 1 day of weapons that the United States gave to Israel, for example. And he promised not 50, but $500 million in 5 years. He gave only 50. And so how can the people, the communities that are impacted in the just transition, in the transition, not just in the transition energy, how can they have direct access to these fundings? How to control it? How the society and also the public institutions and institutions like ourselves that are from justice institutions, we don't have the power to really monitor these funds to see where they are directed.
Thank you, Talita. I can see Palestine is going next, which is a good segue, and I can see a gentleman next following. Please.
Thank you so much for organizing this important event. And for me, I have been saying this in all the forums and sessions about the right to development. I hope that I am not repeating myself, but unfortunately, the situation is ongoing. So I have to say it over again and again and again and again. I have been saying this since 1 year and a half for now. That the right to development is directly connected to ending impunity and ending colonialism, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza is a major example of the reason of the de-development in the world. Just to highlight for some audience who were not with us that OHCHR, the United Nations Conference for the Right to Development, issued its latest report on September. Its latest report highlighted the de-development in Gaza, and it is saying that it will take Gaza 350 years to return to the unacceptable GDP of 2022, and that Gaza has endured even before 2023 several aggressions and since more than a decade and a half. Saying that, also describing the situation in illegally occupied Palestine and Palestinians coming from the West Bank. We living in separated cantons. We don't have a territorial integrity. We are not being able to exploit our own natural resources. Any prospect of development or peace or justice, we are deprived from. We are deprived from the right to life and to the right to exist before even having the privilege of speaking about concerns of the climate change. We are asking if we will be able to stay in our land and our resources. My question is the bags, the plastic bags that are being used to collect the bodies of the Palestinian people, because now they are separated organs of their bodies because of the explosives, and they are being put in plastic bags, that the father in Gaza has to put the body of his child in plastic bags. I think that these plastic bags also affect the climate change, and that should be a concern for the role models of climate change who are speaking about climate change, where we are facing an ongoing genocide in Gaza that is not stopping, unfortunately. And if, according to OHCHR report, I wanted to highlight just one moment that if this genocide has been over in April 2024, it would have taken 30 years to remove the rubble. The latest point that the report of OHCHR affirmed, and I recommend all of you to read it, that to return to the status quo pre the genocide in Gaza is not option. The blockade has to be lifted, the occupation has to end, and the Palestinian people have to be able to exploit their own natural resources. And I think.
Thank you for the intervention, and I'll hand over to the gentleman next. I ask you to keep it to 30 seconds if at all possible, and then I'll circle back to the panel.
Thank you, respected panelists. It's very unique, and for my generation, it's very unique for adapt these types of issues you raise here. So my concern is in the sustainable development goal is issue. Core principle is no one leave behind. So I see a lot of comment and observation that how the marginalized people will be centralized in the economic development perspective in Southeast Asia, and I'm from Nepal. So how do they give to the business and human rights perspective? Like a lot of the high level corporate is going to in the community and welcome for the government to mandatory. They welcome all of the higher international company, but only that they have to make the company main principle is profit. But in my generation is expectation for the what is the human rights perspective to declare they make the human rights audit or not. It's mandatory. I don't know if this floor is give the open discussion for the corporate houses make the audit only for the turnover, their profit, right? But they not can make the human rights audit, how they make the impact in the climate, how they make the workplaces safety or not, and how much marginalized people will be benefit from in the development increasing or not. So universal principle and equality economics and development perspective, how to this floor and the panelists will be concerned the marginalized, especially for the Nepalese perspective. I'm belonging from the Dalit community, how they at the underdevelopment countries, marginalized people is how to affect and then more privileged to centralize in the government development perspective. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see their hands, but I've been told we have 4 minutes. So if you can make it very short, really 30 seconds, I can take that one, and then I will have to ask for final reflections from our panel. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mridul Katari. I'm a scholar activist in India. I was actually expecting more of a reflection in this panel on why is it that human rights and the economy have not come closer together. And what we hear is more sort of theoretical positions or, you know, I think we really need to reflect on that. And the second is there are issues that we have control over and those that we don't. So is the UN on one page in this? I don't think so. If you just see the UNFCCC, the meetings that are held in countries that are serial human rights violators, they're headed by people who are fossil fuel champions. UN agencies are working with corporations that are also violating human rights. So I think there's a lot that can be done. Perhaps the High Commissioner Todd needs to speak out on this. That brings the UN itself together so that we come closer to this link between human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll invite you to read the book. There is a lot more there. I'll invite you to also look more at the OHCHR's work, but I'll leave to Todd to talk about that. I'll just mention that there is a last Mentimeter, and I'll ask our colleagues to open it. I won't show on the screen because we don't have time, but it really asks all of you to say what inspires you about the human rights economy or human rights economies, and feel free to reflect on that while we're closing. And Marina, I'll go to you first. What are the reflections you have based on this panel, and what next? And I should say 1 minute, 30 seconds.
30 seconds then. I'm an optimist as well, as you said before. So this discussion actually inspires me, and not knowing why human rights are not as relevant as for the economy as everyone stated here. It's something that I think we should address, and that's what human rights economies want to address. So what inspires me is that I think we do have the chance to change what the paradox as put before is, and I think we do have the chance and the moral responsibility to do so. I don't think companies should thrive on an unequal world. So that's what inspires me.
Thank you. I will have to keep the 30 seconds and perhaps one phrase, maybe. I don't know if the ambassador would like to reflect on that.
In one phrase, that's going to be a bit hard. I just want to end appreciating this dialogue. I think it's very necessary in these times, and so the fact that we continue to do this and continue talking about substantial measures taken in several countries at the moment with the collaboration of multiple stakeholders, including businesses, responsible businesses, I think this is something that we must continue talking about, and we must continue encouraging the compatibility of human rights and economy in this ongoing crisis, including climate crisis. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much. And then I'll hand over to the counselor for last reflections.
Very shortly, we have tools. We've seen in other processes like business and human rights how instruments have evolved, how we have international law binding instruments and not binding instruments, how guiding principles led to, in some regions, as in my case, the European Union, we could advance much more than it was thought 10 years ago. So links exist. We've talked about lenses, about optics, and the big challenge is implementation, as in many matters. But in this, we have a horizontal touching of all the issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Todd, I'll end with you.
The advantage of the human rights economy is that, technically speaking, there are already legal obligations. The fact that they're widely ignored doesn't make them not legal obligations. While we have a long way to go within our own organization, within member states, and within business, the fact is that human rights is already an obligation, and it's for us, the NGOs, the UN, and for states to take that and make it real. And hopefully we'll be there to support that effort.
Well, on that invitation for a shared journey, and this is a very open and warm invitation, I'll give the word back to the Special Rapporteur.
Thank you very much, Marianne, for doing an excellent moderation. And I would like to also to thank all the panelists, Mr. Honduras, the Council from Spain, Todd, and Mariana. So excellent interventions from the floor as well. As you may have seen, this session was part of development dialogue, and the idea is that the format is slightly different, right? So idea is to involve the participants, and we are trying to do that. So we welcome feedback, how we can improve this. So it's not a typical panel presentations format, making it more dynamic. That is the whole idea. And you can remain assured that my mandate on the right development will remain at the forefront of some of the challenges the world is facing, that how the right development can provide this. And in that spirit, I'm collaborating with the SR on extreme poverty, Professor Olivier Schutter and myself, and we will be convening a roundtable in the very same room, in fact, on the 11th of December. I think it's 1:15 p.m. And that is going to focus on financing for development. And I think that's where the Spain, because we want to brainstorm again with member states, you will get a formal invitation. But if you are here in the room already, you can make a note. 11th of December, this very room, 1:15 p.m. And the next session, and the last session for today, is closely linked to human rights economy, because that is where the discussion is going to be about tax justice and right to development. And that session is co-organized with South Center and Tax Justice Network. So there's plenty happening. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in these sessions. I very much look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias. Y